There's a place that Brenda and I love to go to. It's at the Boca Grande Pass, down off the south end of the Gasparilla Island. And we load up a couple of lawn chairs on the back of a golf cart and get a cooler with some cold drinks in there. We ride down and get right there at the water's edge and sit our lawn chairs there and just look at nothing but water. But it's an interesting place to look at the water because the water there just rumbles. It's coming in from several different directions into that pass, and it was interesting. We were there one day, and it was doing what it normally does. It was just rumbling and etc. And all of a sudden it was getting evening, and a storm moved in there, and the sky turned black. And the lightning was coming, and you could see it coming out of the sky and hitting out there on the water. There were two guys that had flown there from France just to fish for sharks. And I don't think they were ready. Well, they were ready for the sharks. I don't think they were ready for that spot and that storm, because I'm telling you, we all started getting out of there in a great big hurry. I've never been to Cape Town, South Africa. I've had several friends that have gone there, and they've said that's the most beautiful place in all the world. The sights there at Cape Town are spectacular, they say. But there's one area there out of Cape Town, that's a peninsula, where the waters are coming in from 3 or 4 different directions, and it just seems like storms all the time. And ships have historically had a horrible time getting around that peninsula to go to a whole different place in the world. The water comes and the wind comes from the Antarctic one way, coming from the south. So it's cold, cold wind coming from the south, and waves are crashing. And then there's water coming from the Atlantic to the west, and it's coming. Those winds are coming, and gale force winds at times blowing. And then there's water that's mixed with the warm Indian Ocean, and those gale force winds at times coming. The waves are coming, and it is just a horrible place. If you read about the struggles that mariners have had trying to pass that area, trying to get through there to get to the old new other part of the world, it's been quite a history, and there have been all kinds of seamen who have been lost. There have been all kinds of ships that have wrecked right there in that spot. Well, that's kind of what's going on in the 27th chapter of Acts. We're almost finished with Acts. We'll finish next week, 28th chapter. It'll be done. But this 27th chapter is so interesting. It says there early on in the chapter, it says we, and it says us. We know who the we is. It's the physician Luke was traveling with Paul at this time. You remember Paul had been in Caesarea, and he had gone before Festus and King Agrippa. And I don't know if you remember, we talked about it last Sunday, but Paul went through his whole story, his whole testimony, and King Agrippa let him talk. And when they got to the end of it, King Agrippa realized that Paul had insisted on being taken to Rome to be tried by Caesar, because he was a citizen of Rome, which was a highly thought of. It was just a great thing to be at times. But Paul, the scholars say that Paul should not have pulled that card. You know, if you have a card, hey, I know, I used once, I got pulled over in Decatur, and all of a sudden said, hey, I'm good friends with the chief of police, Nate Allen. I know him and his wife, etc. Well, I don't think he did. I didn't get a ticket, but I'm sure that's not why. But you know, we have a tendency, if we have a card, try to pull it sometimes. So Paul pulled his citizen of Rome card, and King Agrippa, in the last verse, King Agrippa, if you put it in layman's terms, King Agrippa is saying, why did you do that, Paul? You know, basically, I don't have a choice now. I would have let you off. He would have walked out of there scot-free. And yet now he's going to be transported to Rome to be tried by Caesar. Now, you and I know that God is in this. If we're looking at it just from a human perspective, we'd say, well, that was dumb, Paul. You shouldn't have pulled out that card. You should have just let King Agrippa say you're innocent right there. You've been a free man. You could have gone home, gone back to Tarsus, and sat out on the deck and enjoyed the sun and etc., looking from our eyes and our perspective. But yet we know that God is moving in this. And so we have Paul being transported by ship in the 27th chapter of Acts. And he's being transported with two of his friends, Aristarchus and with Luke. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the 27th chapter of Acts is that scholars say that this is one of the best collections. The 27th chapter of Acts is one of the best collections that is out there to give insight into how mariners deal with storms and etc. Just looking at it not on a spiritual level, but looking at it for those who are into how ships work and what ships do and sailing and etc. They say it's a great compilation of that. It's been studied throughout history just for that purpose. There's all kinds of details in here that Luke, who is the physician, and he's the detailed guy, is giving us. So I know we started later in the chapter, but I just want to mention the first verse or two to kind of get us on the context, and then we'll kind of move down as we go. The 27th chapter, first verse says, "And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Agrabadium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia," and by the way, that's how ships sailed in those days. Ships avoided getting out onto the high seas, as we would call them, and they would go along the coast, stay there where it was somewhat safe. We'll see that it wasn't real safe, but somewhat safe going up that coast, even if it took a lot more miles to do that. Paul was involved in 3 shipwrecks. One, he was dumb enough to get on another ship. And 3, dumb enough to get on the 3rd ship. He was involved in 3 ships that wrecked. Scholars say that he was involved in about 3,400, 3,500 nautical miles of sailing. And so he's getting ready to get on this other ship, and he's with this Roman centurion who has him under watchful eye. He's not being treated as a horrible prisoner. In fact, Julius has several other prisoners in this bunch, and they are bad people. They're people that have done bad things, and they were under chains, and etc. But Paul was given some flexibility, and we'll see that maybe in just a moment, to live life somewhat naturally in that situation. Says that we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus of Macedonia from Thessalonica, and the next day we put in at Sidon. Sidon wasn't very far up the coast. They'd started there at Caesarea. They'd gone about 40 miles up the coast, put in at Sidon. So far, so good. It's like a Caribbean cruise. I mean, everything's beautiful. Well, I'm sure the water was beautiful right there, and they had safe sailing, and probably Paul was thinking, hey, this is not too bad to sail on this ship. And it says, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. He wasn't under lock and chain. He was a prisoner, but he was trusted, and he was allowed to go and pretty much do what he wanted to do there at Sidon. It says, in putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. When we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. Ships were going all the time from Alexandria, which was a major seaport in Egypt. They were going to Rome. Egypt was the breadbasket of the world, and especially wheat. There were 1 million people, it's been estimated, living in the city of Rome. 1 million people at that time. And so they were shipping in, they were importing wheat all the time. These ships were large. They were like barges. And Julius found out about that, so they moved over to be a part of this ship. It was going to be a quicker route to get straight to Italy and to Rome, and that's what's going on now. It says we sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with, this is interesting to me, arrived with difficulty. I don't want any difficulty if I'm on a boat. I don't know about you, but I've been in those kind of situations. I can't swim, but I was out in the middle of Lake Erie one time in a little fishing boat, and we'd been warned. They said when they put those sirens off, you better get off that lake. And I don't know if you've been to the Great Lakes. I know some of you have. I mean, well, you just need to go there. It's like the ocean. You're out in the middle of it. It's just like being on the sea, and all of a sudden those sirens started going, and we sheared a pin. Well, that's technical terms for the motor conked out, had trouble. And these waves were just roaring. And they told us you've got to keep your boat pointed into the waves. Well, if you don't have a motor, it's pretty hard to do that. And I thought, even as a kid, I thought, well, I'm going to be in this water pretty soon. We're going to sink. Something's going to happen. Good news is we made it. But I'm just saying, I don't want any difficulty if I'm out on the water. So something's going on. And it says, as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone, coasting along it with difficulty. We came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lacey. I've been to Fair Haven, Massachusetts. It's a beautiful little town. It's named after this Fair Havens. In the Bible, it's close to New Bedford, Massachusetts, which is the old whaling capital of the world. And Fair Havens is right there as well. And like it's a beautiful place, this was a beautiful place for them to be at this time. And I think Paul would have loved to have just stayed right there in Fair Havens, not climbed on another boat. He'd already been in a couple of shipwrecks before this. And so I don't think he was quick at all to want to get out there. But I want to show you something here and skip down 21st verse. This is so hilarious. And it just tells me Paul and Paul's personality. You have to see this. Paul had, we didn't read it, but Paul had told them, well, let's don't go out on the ship, period. Let's stay right here. We don't want to get back in the ship. If we do, we're going to wreck. All of us are going to die, and etc. But the man who owned the boat and the man who was the helmsman said, hey, you're a preacher, just keep your mouth shut, we know about this thing. And they insisted on going forward. And so listen to Paul here, 21st verse. It says, since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, men, see that? That's hilarious. Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail for Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. And they're thinking, okay, we're all going to live. You know how many people are involved in this at this moment? 276 people on this ship. And he's saying that all 276 people are going to live, but the ship's going to go down. Now, if you are a curious mind, you're probably thinking, how in the world is that going to happen? But that's what he tells them. He says, for this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I've been told, but we must run aground on some island. They had been in the pitch dark for 14 days in the horrible storms. I can't even imagine it. They hadn't eaten one bite. It wasn't because there wasn't some food available. It was because they're all sick. They had been in a horrible storm 14 days. And this guy who told them, don't go back there, is now saying, you should have listened to me when I said that, but oh, don't worry, it's all taken care of. We're going to be all right. Let me make this point. God is always on mission. God is always on mission. God is on mission right here. This is not primarily about a ship. This is not primarily about 276 people, including Paul. This is primarily, and we can't forget this is primarily about God's mission. Hear me say something, and I hope you get this. God is always at work around you. When I was in college, I wanted to serve God. Now, I was headed to law school. I had no interest in the ministry. I didn't even really like ministers. I didn't see myself as one. But I did pray, and I prayed sincerely for God to show me His will. And I remember praying, oh God, show me your will. Show me what you want me to do. What kind of a lawyer do you want me to be? And et cetera, et cetera. And finally, years later, I was discipled and taught, God, you don't have to get on your knees and beg God to show you His will. I wish I'd known that and understood it. Here's what I learned. God is always at work around you. God is always doing something around you. And what we are to do as Christian disciples, what we're to do is discover what God is doing and join Him in that. God's not looking for us to start some new deal. God is looking for us to join Him in what He's already doing. God is working in this part of Morgan County. God's working in Morgan County. God's working in Alabama. God's working all over the world. Our job is to find out what's He doing and join Him in that. And that's what we're learning here. If we study this chapter carefully, we learn that God is on mission. And God's mission was to get Paul to Rome to testify before Caesar. Why? The gospel was already spreading like wildfire primarily through this missionary, the Apostle Paul. But God knew that if this Apostle Paul, the missionary, could get to Rome, that God's gospel message would spread faster and would spread further. Now, if we were to look at this from human eyes, natural eyes, how we normally look at things, and Paul is going through these horrible ship experiences, we might have been tempted. I think I would have been tempted to have said to Paul, hey man, you've done your duty. You got scars on your back, you've been in shipwreck, you've been bitten by snakes, and the whole thing. Why don't you just go home and let somebody else do something? And I've heard Christians even say, you know, hey, I've served for a long time. I've taught Sunday school for 30 years. I've had people say that to me. I've taught Sunday school for 30 years. I'm just going to kind of put it in neutral for the rest of the time. Well, the only problem with that is there is no retirement plan. There's none. Zero. Nada e nada. No retirement plan in the New Testament. We are called to serve Him until we are a cadaver. God has a mission. God has a purpose. And if you're 95 years old and you have a very hard time being mobile, and you're in a nursing home where you're extremely confined, God has a purpose. God has a mission. God has something that He wants you to do if you will discover what He's doing around you and join Him in that. I want us to also see, and I'm going out on a real thin limb right here, and it's extremely important to me that you listen to me carefully because this can be confusing. The other point that I want to make here is that God is sovereign. God is sovereign. God's perfect will is being done in this situation because God's perfect will is to get Paul to Caesar to testify as to how Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus Christ, Jesus the Messiah, had changed his whole world. I use that word sovereign carefully. You'll see that a lot in Christian writings. God is sovereign. I believe that God is sovereign. But please listen to this. There are Christian ministers and Christian teachers, etc., that when they use the word sovereign, they believe that God is directing every atom, every neutron, proton. God is directing every aspect of my life, your life. God is manipulating. That's not the word they would use. God is manipulating what we do, what happens, etc. I cannot buy that. I'm giving you a confession as your pastor. I cannot buy that. Because if I buy that, then I've got to believe that God directed Hitler to kill millions of Jews brutally. And these people say, well, God had some purpose for that. I have a problem with that. But I do believe I learned a 60-cent theological word when I was in seminary, and don't be impressed by this. It's one of the few words that I learned, okay, and that I remember. Hausgeschichte. That's a German theological word. Hausgeschichte. And that phrase means salvation history. I believe that God is moving history to His salvific, His salvation ends. Means God is directing and leading history to His end. That doesn't mean that He controls every little rock that's thrown and etc. It doesn't mean that at all. But it does mean He's sovereign in Haus Geschichte, moving toward His purpose, toward His end. And He knows that in the end, He has the victory. He knows that victory is already won. He's making this movement in history. And that's what's happening here. We see God leading. We see God moving in His sovereign will. And it's coming out to His end. But we're also seeing in this chapter that God is patient. God is patient. He's willing to wait for His will to be done. I hope you see this morning that God is wanting to do something through you. It would be a big mistake if you just had a nice Bible study and left here thinking, oh, that's good, let's go to lunch, and not see that God is speaking to you and to me as well as God was speaking to Paul. God has a purpose for our lives. God has something that He wants us to do. We're going to make mistakes. He's not directing us like a computer to do every little thing that He wants us to do. We're going to make decisions. Some of those will be good. Some of those will be bad decisions. But God is moving. God wants to do that in our lives. He's moving. He wants us to join Him in what He's doing. And I'm wondering, are you here this morning and you would like to be in that situation? You would say, or you're saying to yourself, you know what, I really would love to join God in what He's doing in this world. God will reveal that to you. God will use you. God is looking for willing hearts. Are you willing to be a willing heart and to join? If you're here this morning and you don't know Jesus Christ as your Savior and Lord, I would invite you to join Him this morning. You say, Lord, I want to turn from my sins and this direction that I'm following, and I want to repent, turn and follow you. I want you to be my Savior and Lord. Or you may be here this morning and not be an active member of a local church. Whatever decision God places on your heart, I would invite you to make that public as we stand and sing. Would you do that? Would you stand and let's sing?